In today's episode, I'll be transforming this boring, empty corner into a completely brand new scene. It all begins with a 2x4 foot, 1 inch thick sheet of insulation foam. I start by placing it down where I want it, and then pushing it down hard enough to leave indentions on the bottom that come from the tracks. These indentions will help me know where to cut. Then I mark it with a Sharpie to see it better. And again, since I wasn't happy with the first line. Now I can cut it with my razor blade. This would be much easier with a hot wire foam cutter, but since I don't have one, this will do the job just fine. Once I am done, I am left with a sort of rough draft that will need some more fine tuning. Next is to figure out exactly how much needs to be cut off before we actually glue it down. Now it's cut to how I want it, so we can now move on to the next step. To glue it down, I'll be using a generous amount of tacky glue. As I place it down, I wiggle it back and forth to help spread out all the glue. Heavy objects are then placed on it to make sure it stays in place. The next day everything is dry, and I've placed a few of these structures that will be on here to help me visualize how I want to create the scene. Once I have some ideas, it's time to execute them. First will be a small road to get to the propane tanks. To help draw the curvy road, I made a makeshift Sharpie holder, so the road stays 3 inches wide. This makes drawing the road much easier. The first attempt was a fail, but I did get it on the second go. Then I finish it off by hand. Starting off, this is all I'll need to make my road. First things first is the pop-dot tape, which gets laid down on the lines that we just drew. And for the harder to follow curves, I cut a slit in the pop-dot tape so it can conform to the lines I drew easier. Road preparations are complete, so now we can get some putty down. Now that it's done, we must wait 24 hours for it to completely dry. The next day everything is white, which means we can now sand it smooth. First we need to remove all the pop-dot tape, which honestly is one of my favorite parts. Sanding with some fine grit sandpaper follows. Then the entire road is wiped down with a damp paper towel to remove any and all dust. Country gray matte acrylic paint is what I like to use for roads, although I might paint this road differently in the future just to switch things up. Now it's time to scratch build the retaining wall. Polystyrene is what I'll be using for this. A combo square and my hobby knife is what I'll be using to cut these strips. The combo square is 1 inch wide, which is exactly how tall I need my pieces to be, which helps me out a little bit. The most important thing I keep in mind is making sure everything is straight and at a 90-degree angle. One piece down, 2 more to go. Here's all the strips of polystyrene in the spots where they will go. But first we must paint them. I'll be using this flat gray primer by Rust-Oleum. I'm also going to be repainting the propane tanks after sanding down the rough spots. Now that they're all dry, it's time to make them look a little bit more realistic. As you can see, I've already done one of the strips, and this will be the look I'm going for. I'll be using my country gray with a few drops of yellow. And I will be applying it with a makeup sponge to give the walls a little texture. After a couple of coats, we now have the final look. Pretty big difference from what they looked like before. Time to remove them from the painter's tape that held them down while I painted them. Tacky glue is what I'll be using to glue them to the foam. On the last piece, I do lightly mark with my fingernail where it needs to end, so I know how to angle my cut. Having it cut like this will make it look like a more realistic end to my wall. It is slightly floating on the right side, but bear with me because we will resolve that soon. Before I do go any further, I do want to show some of the inspiration for the propane tank area. I will be going more for the look on the left though. Next up, I'll be using some Woodland Scenics Moldacine plaster to make a nice natural hill. I've never used this before, so we'll see how it goes. Here are the instructions if you do plan to pick this up yourself. Now to open it up and see what we're working with. I'll be using my Harley mug to mix it up with some water. I'm just eyeballing the amount of water at first, then I add more if I need to. The powder on the bottom means that I do need to add more water. Now I can shape up this little hill while I also consider the end of the retaining wall. In the end, I do want a nice smooth transition from wall to hill. This is the final look before the drying process. So far everything is going as planned, but there is plenty to do before it's done. "48 hours later, it's almost dry, which is a little bit crazy, but we can work on some other things in the meantime. Next up on the to-do list is making some concrete pillars for the retaining wall. These are made with some square polystyrene tubing. Here I have 7 pieces that are all 1 inch long. I'll be painting these just like the walls, except I won't be spray painting them at first. My favorite thing to do with the Walters kit boxes that are empty when I'm done with the kits is to use them for storage. This is where I keep all my polystyrene and other good stuff. Alright, back to what I was doing. As with the walls, I'm using country gray with a few drops of this yellow. Because I didn't spray them with a primer, they will need more than a couple coats of paint. The painting is almost done, and I've also made a corner piece for the corner on the wall by cutting a piece of square tubing in half diagonally. The final coat of paint is dry now, so we can now glue them on the wall. I'll first start out by placing them over the seams to make the wall look like one whole piece. And here's that one corner piece I was just talking about. Now the wall looks much more complete. Next up is ground coverage. Instead of painting on a glue as my base, I'll be using a mix of these acrylic paints. Before we do start, I decided to cover up the gap between the 2 sections of the layout. This way no dirt falls through and it looks like one whole piece. Another plus is if and when I do decide to take apart my layout, I can just peel up the tape and redo it after it's been put back together. Am I using note cards as a paint tray? Yes I am. So we're now going to paint where I want the dirt to go. Then I could start sprinkling some dirt through my sifter onto the wet paint. We continue applying paint and the dirt right after. Things are coming along nicely, and the inspector here would like to agree. Here I'm marking up the foam lightly with a pencil to know exactly where the dirt should go. and then I repeat the same process of paint and dirt right after. We're now done with the dirt part of this area, so now we can glue it down. As always, I spray it with isopropyl alcohol, and then I glue it down with a mix of Mod Podge and water. The glue is now dry, and we can now move on to the next part. This sand here is great, and it's pretty cheap. I'll be using it for the shoulders on the road, which will add contrast and make things look a little bit more realistic. This is just a start with the sand, because I do add more after this. Here it is all glued and close to its final look, but now we must get rid of that final section of pink foam. That area will be covered with the Superior Scenics Obsidian Ultrafine Gravel. Just like with the sand, I'll be painting a layer of glue before laying down the gravel. Once the glue is spread out, I sprinkle on the gravel right from the bag. Here's how it looks before it's glued. I did also make an entrance to this spot to show exactly where the trucks will pull in. The following day, it's now dry, and of course it can be walked on. The obsidian gravel dried much darker than I thought it would, but it still looks good. Next up is to apply some decals to the propane tanks. I will admit that this was almost a complete failure, and you'll see why here in a second. I start by cutting out the ones I want to use. Then I put them on a plate and I fill it up with some water, which might have been a mistake. As they sit in the water, I brush on some microset directly onto the tank. I grab the decal, which now says Commercial Pro, and then it becomes Commercial P soon after. It just gets worse from here, but I do try my best to stay calm, and I just center up the decal the best I can without destroying it. Things get even worse when my camera dies, and of course all my other batteries are dead. But I did manage to get the one decal on pretty well. The other one was in too many pieces for me to bother with, which is alright because there wouldn't be a reason to have the logo on the second one behind it, since you wouldn't really see it. The next detail to add are some yellow concrete barriers. This way the propane tanks are protected, just like in the photo I showed before. Here's all the stuff I'll be using at first. I couldn't find any skewers at the store, so I'm going to have to use these ones that have the clip on the end. I tried using my Atlas saw, but it wasn't working, so I just used my needle nose pliers instead. Next up is to sand all the pieces so they have a smooth top. Once we're done sanding, we can now paint them. I only really need to paint half of each piece since the other half will be in the foam. Here they are after 2 coats. I think I end up doing 2 more after this. Finally, we can start adding them to the layout. We're all set up, and we also have a couple more little details. I thought I was going to use a stop sign, but there just wasn't enough room for it. I start by drilling a small hole in the gravel. Then a small screwdriver widens the hole so the process is easier. A little tacky glue goes on the bottom of the pole, and bam, we have a cheap concrete barrier. I'm just eyeballing these, but what I did to help was I put one on each end, and then I put one in the middle, and then I put one in the middle again, and so on. All that's left is the ones on the left side of the tanks. There was only 2 more barriers left, so I decided to use them around the electrical transformer. We are coming to the end here, and I'm pretty happy with how it's turned out. As you can see, I've also done a lot more ballasting at this point, and I've also filled in more ground cover that was needed. There is still plenty of small details to add, but I'd say that this is a great start. Enjoy the train running around the layout in these last clips. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this longer episode, and I will see you all in the next video.